a dry riverbed. No one pointed to it, yet it held the nation's attention for 59 days. I don't touch anything anymore. The women's clothes, the button-down shirt. Everything has been left exactly as it was. But behind a house in Tucson, Arizona, there's a wash, a quiet, dried-up riverbed that seemed meaningless at first. And somehow, it became the center of one of the most gripping missing person cases. Not because law enforcement declared it important. There was no official statement directing attention there. It all began with one man carrying a camera and a grid, stepping into the area, documenting what he found, and unintentionally drawing the eyes of the world. That wash runs directly behind Annie Guthrie's house, the woman who reported Nancy missing on the morning of February 1st. And from that moment on, everything connected to that place became harder to explain than anyone expected. 59 days. And still no suspect, no confirmed crime scene, no clear answer, only one question that refuses to go away. Where is Nancy? At the center of it all is the woman whose home sits at the heart of this investigation. Nearly 2 months have passed since that February morning, and Nancy Guthrie's family, along with the entire country, is still waiting. Waiting for something concrete. Waiting for answers that haven't come. Then, on March 28, 2026, day 59 of the search, something changed. A YouTuber, moving through that same dry wash on foot, came across multiple pieces of clothing. Not just anywhere, but in the exact drainage channel where investigators had already been alerted weeks earlier about a pair of pants. This time, it didn't stay unnoticed. The sheriff was notified. Deputies were made aware. The discovery was documented. Photos were released publicly. But what actually happened when law enforcement arrived? And more importantly, what do those items mean? Because their location matters. Found directly behind Annie's house, they begin to reshape every theory built around that night, where Nancy may have gone and why. This is what this video is about. Because in cases like this, the smallest details are never just small. A wash, a jacket, a pair of pants. A searcher returning to the same stretch of ground for a second time. Each piece adds weight. And right now, they carry implications that law enforcement has yet to fully explain to the public. Stay with me, because before we talk about what was found, you need to understand who found it. Exploring with Jim is not just a random guy walking around with a camera. Since early February, when this case first broke, Jim has been independently carrying out systematic grid searches across the Tucson area. He's not law enforcement, no badge, no official authority, no forensic tools. Just a camera, a pair of boots, and the persistence to go where others haven't fully covered. What he does is simple in concept, but demanding in practice. Grid searching, dividing land into sections, walking each one carefully, documenting everything, then going back and doing it again. Because in terrain like this, you can't assume that just because something wasn't there before, it isn't there now. Wind shifts objects. Rain moves debris. Vegetation conceals what was once visible. And in a desert wash, where every storm can reshape the ground, something hidden 3 weeks ago can suddenly be exposed. Jim knows that. That's why he returned. This wasn't even his first discovery connected to this case. The pair of pants previously found in that same wash, the same drainage channel behind Annie Guthrie's house, came from this exact kind of search. That discovery caught attention, was documented, and turned over to authorities. But decisions out there aren't easy. When you're the one finding these items, you're left wondering what matters, what doesn't, and what it all means. Now, on March 28th, Jim goes back. Same wash. Same general area. Same grid. Only this time, he finds more. Not one item, but multiple pieces of clothing, found in the exact same spot as before. When Jim returned to the wash, the online community immediately understood the significance. One discovery might be coincidence, but multiple finds in the same defined location? That's something else entirely. And that's exactly what's happening behind Annie Guthrie's house. Jim's method, returning, grid searching, documenting, has turned him from a bystander into someone actively contributing to the case. He's not just searching, he's finding, and he's reporting everything directly to the sheriff. There's often skepticism toward independent searchers, concerns about interference or misinformation. But in this case, the record tells a different story. The record supports Jim. It supports the community. Twice now, he has delivered documented findings from the same location, photographed in place, properly reported, and publicly recorded. That's not interference. That's responsible evidence handling. And it matters. The geography in this case isn't just background, it's central to everything. The wash behind Annie Guthrie's house runs through a residential area of Tucson under the jurisdiction of the Pima County Sheriff. At first glance, it may seem insignificant, but in the Sonoran Desert, a wash is a natural drainage channel. Dry most of the time, yet capable of sudden, powerful flooding during monsoon season. These channels cut through neighborhoods, connecting areas in ways roads cannot, often going unnoticed as just another part of the landscape. But washes are notoriously difficult to search. They are filled with dense desert vegetation, uneven rocky ground, and constantly shifting terrain. When storms hit, they don't just carry water. They move debris, bury objects, or expose things that weren't visible before. What wasn't there weeks ago can suddenly appear, and what was once visible can disappear just as quickly. What makes this specific wash so important is the path it provides. It offers a way to move away from Annie's house without using roads, without vehicles, and without being captured on cameras or seen by witnesses. Hidden behind the property, it leads through rough terrain into a larger network of drainage channels that extend far beyond the immediate area. In a case where the central mystery is how Nancy could have left without being seen, this kind of route changes the entire scope of the investigation. Law enforcement has known about this wash since the early days of the investigation. The earlier discovery of the pants wasn't the first time attention was drawn to this drainage corridor. It has been discussed, revisited, and questioned for weeks. But on March 28th, it demanded attention again. First the pants, now a jacket, and more. Look at this. You see those spots? I don't know. That looks like blood to me. Multiple items. Same location. The same wash continues to produce evidence, and at some point, that pattern stops being coincidence. The geography is not random, it's telling a story. And here's what often gets overlooked. Most people following this case have never actually stepped into that terrain. Satellite images don't show depth. Photos don't capture how dense the vegetation is, how the channel drops, how sound disappears at night, or how easily objects can be hidden. But Jim has been there. He's walked it. And from that perspective, what he found on March 28th doesn't feel accidental. These items were either placed there intentionally or carried in a way that points back to where they came from. Geography doesn't lie. It doesn't speculate. It simply holds what's left behind until someone finds it. And on March 28th, 2026, something was found. Let's be precise, because in a case like this, facts matter more than anything else. Everything here comes from a documented post on X, published on March 28, 2026, by the account Hopi's Faith 24. The post was a direct reply within the true crime community and included tagged references, along with photographs that serve as the foundation for what we know. On that same day, day 59 of the search for Nancy Guthrie, Exploring with Jim returned to the wash behind Annie Guthrie's house and made another discovery. This time, multiple items of clothing. Based on the images shared, those items appeared to include a dark jacket and a pair of pants, found together in the same drainage channel where pants had already been recovered weeks earlier. The photos show the items exactly as they were found, lying on the ground, undisturbed. Nothing moved. Nothing altered. Documented in place. That matters. Because in an active missing person case, that is the correct protocol. You don't touch anything, you don't reposition it, you capture it as is. And that's exactly what Jim did. After documenting the scene, he reported the discovery to the Pima County Sheriff's Department. According to the Post, deputies were notified. No speculation. Just documented evidence, recorded in real time, and now part of the timeline. Let's draw a clear line, because in a case like this, the difference between what is confirmed and what is not matters more than ever. What do we actually know? The items were found. They were photographed. The images clearly show multiple pieces of clothing lying in the wash behind Annie Guthrie's house. And the sheriff's department was notified. Those are facts. What we do not know is just as important. There is no confirmed connection between these items and Nancy Guthrie or the events of February 1st, 2026. That link has not been established by the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the FBI, or any forensic authority. To reach that point would require collection, lab testing, DNA or fiber analysis, and an official conclusion. None of that has happened, at least not publicly. So what we're left with is not an answer, but a pattern, a location, and a question that now sits squarely with law enforcement. And given how this investigation has been handled so far, it's not unreasonable to expect that every step moving forward will be closely watched. What's also part of this story is how quickly the community reacted. Within hours of the original post, online investigators were already analyzing the find, mapping the location, comparing it to the earlier discovery, measuring distances, studying the photos, and testing every theory about how someone could have moved from that property undetected. Because in this case, every detail matters. And right now, the details are starting to connect. This isn't random speculation. This is structured, investigative thinking from a community that has been deeply engaged with this case for nearly 2 months. In fact, the level of analysis coming from the public has, at times, gone further than what law enforcement has chosen to share. And that gap in communication, that's something the Sheriff's Department ultimately has to answer for. But here's what stands out most right now: the pattern. The wash behind Annie Guthrie's house has now produced more than one discovery tied to this case. First, a pair of pants. Then, on March 28th, additional clothing, what appears to be a jacket and more pants. Different days, same drainage channel, same narrow geographic corridor. In missing person investigations, especially those with no clear scene, this kind of clustering is critical. It's how investigators begin to trace movement, build timelines, and identify locations that shift from background detail to primary focus. Because one item can be dismissed. It could have been carried there, dropped, unrelated. But when multiple items are found, in the same place, across different points in time, that explanation starts to fall apart. At that point, it's no longer just a location. It's a pattern. And patterns demand answers. So now the question becomes unavoidable. Is this coincidence? Or is it a trail? This is where investigative logic comes in. In cases like this, experts don't just examine the item, they examine the location. How did it get there? From which direction would something have traveled to end up exactly in that spot? What does the terrain reveal about the path from where it started to where it was found? In a desert wash system, movement isn't random. Objects tend to follow the natural flow, downhill, along the channel. So when multiple items appear within the same stretch, the next logical question is simple. Do they come from the same origin point? And could that origin point be connected to the property that feeds directly into this wash? These are not accusations. They are investigative questions, the kind that only proper fieldwork and forensic analysis can answer. But they only get answered if the Sheriff's Department treats this pattern with the urgency it demands. Because washes are not just part of the landscape, they can also serve a purpose. In situations where something needed to be moved quickly and without being seen, they offer exactly that. Easy access from a backyard. Minimal visibility at night. No pavement to hold footprints. No streetlights. No cameras covering what happens behind a property line. If someone needed a route without witnesses, a wash like this would provide it. That's not a conclusion. But it is a possibility that can't be ignored. What we're looking at here isn't a random idea. It's a pattern investigators have seen before in similar terrain and similar cases. No one is claiming what happened in that wash. But the geography makes certain possibilities worth examining, and the repeated discoveries make them harder to ignore. There's also a question that always comes up when evidence like this is found: contamination. Could these clothes have been there long before this case? Could they belong to someone else entirely? The answer is yes. That's always possible in an open environment like this. And that's exactly why forensic testing matters. Items like these aren't judged by location alone. They're analyzed for trace evidence, DNA, fibers, biological material, anything that can connect them to a specific person, time, or event. That's how you separate coincidence from relevance. But even before testing, location still tells us something important. It tells investigators where to focus. And a wash that has now produced multiple clothing items, all in close proximity to the property at the center of this case, is no longer just background. It's a location that demands attention. Because whether those items are connected or not, only forensic results will decide that. But the pattern itself is enough to make sure this place cannot be overlooked. The pattern points to one thing: we need answers. And that brings us to a critical detail: the sheriff has been notified. That phrase carries weight in this case, but it also raises questions. Because understanding what it means requires looking at how the Pima County Sheriff's Department has handled this investigation so far. The record matters. Sheriff Chris Nanos has faced a formal vote of no confidence from within his own department. Not from the public, but from his own deputies and personnel. That signals something deeper than outside criticism. It reflects internal concern about leadership and decision-making. And it doesn't stop there. Former Chief Deputy Rick Castigar, someone with direct knowledge of the department's inner workings, has publicly raised concerns about how this case has been handled. His statements were clear, on record, and grounded in experience. Then there's former Sheriff Dr. Richard Carmona, who also served as U.S. Surgeon General. He went even further, stating publicly that the crime scene in this case had been permanently corrupted. Not partially compromised. Not recoverable. Permanently. All of that context shapes how we interpret a simple statement: the sheriff has been notified. Because in a case like this, notification is just the beginning. What happens next is what really matters. Those statements carry serious weight, and they haven't been clearly addressed by the current leadership of the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Against that backdrop, the phrase, "the sheriff has been notified," doesn't bring reassurance. It raises concern. Because this isn't new. Tips have been submitted before. Discoveries have been reported. The community has stepped forward with information, and then waited. And too often, what happened next was unclear, undocumented, or never fully explained. So when Jim made this discovery and notified authorities, the real questions begin. Did deputies respond to the scene? Did they physically examine the wash? Were the items collected, documented, logged into evidence? Were independent photos taken? Was this discovery compared to the earlier pants found in the same location? Was the pattern recognized and investigated? Was the FBI involved? Right now, there are no clear, documented answers to those questions. And that absence matters. Because in an active missing person case, the public has a right to understand how law enforcement handles evidence brought forward by the community. The stakes here are high. If these items are collected, tested, and forensically linked to Nancy Guthrie, it would mark a turning point. After 59 days with no confirmed crime scene, no established timeline, and no identified suspect, a direct connection between physical evidence and Nancy would change the entire direction of this case. If these items are collected and tested, and found to have no connection to the case, that still matters. Ruling out a possibility is part of real investigative work. Leads are meant to be followed, examined, and closed, not left sitting, unanswered, in a wash. But if they aren't collected at all, if the Sheriff's Department receives this information and fails to respond with the urgency that a second cluster of evidence demands, then that becomes a story of its own. And it's one this community will not ignore. There's also a pattern here that needs to be acknowledged. The Pima County Sheriff's Department did not initially bring attention to the first pants found in this wash. The community did. The department did not highlight the wash behind Annie's house as a key geographic focus. The community identified that too. And now, with a second discovery in the same location, It's happening again. The community finds. Law enforcement reacts. Communication remains limited. And the community continues pushing forward. That cycle, community discovery followed by delayed or incomplete official response, has defined the first 59 days of this investigation. Which is why the phrase, "the sheriff has been notified," cannot be taken at face value. It has to be understood within that pattern. Because everything traces back to one moment, February 1st, 2026. The night Nancy disappeared. The point from which every question in this case begins. And now, that wash behind Annie Guthrie's house is pulling this case back to where it all began, and it's impossible to ignore. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, was reported missing on the morning of February 1st. That single call set everything in motion. And nearly 59 days later, we are still trying to understand what happened in the hours before it. What unfolded overnight. Where Nancy was, whether she left on her own, was taken, or never left the immediate area at all. These aren't fringe ideas. These are the core questions of this case. And now, with physical evidence clustering in the wash behind the house, those questions are becoming impossible to push aside. Because one of the biggest mysteries has always been this. There is no clear record of Nancy leaving. No surveillance footage. No Ring camera capturing her walking. No neighbor's camera placing her on the street. No confirmed vehicle. No visible path. People don't simply vanish without a trace, especially not from inside a home. Unless the path they took was never captured in the first place. The back of a property. A fence line. A wash cutting through residential land. No cameras, no streetlights, no pavement to hold footprints. In the dark, with knowledge of the terrain, that kind of route disappears almost instantly from any record. And if that's the path, it changes everything. This is what the wash behind Annie Guthrie's house represents from an investigative standpoint. A path unseen by surveillance. A corridor now drawing forensic attention for the second time. No longer a one-off anomaly, but a developing pattern. In cases like this, investigators often work backward from physical evidence. Find an item, then ask, how did it get here? From there, you trace the most likely path back to its origin, factoring in terrain, timing, and environmental conditions. That's exactly what this wash is now offering. 2 points to work from. First, the earlier discovery of pants. Then, on March 28th, a jacket and additional clothing, multiple items, found in the same location. When you follow that logic, tracing backward from that cluster, the direction it points to becomes hard to ignore. Up the channel, toward the property connected directly to it. That is not a conclusion about what happened. But it is a direction, one that the evidence is beginning to suggest. And in a case that has gone 59 days without a confirmed crime scene or a clear route of movement, even a direction matters. Because whatever happened that night occurred within a window of time we still can't fully define. Nancy was reported missing in the morning. But what happened before that remains the central question we are still trying to answer. The entire mystery of this case lives in the hours between the last confirmed sighting and that morning phone call. Because movement at night is not the same as movement in daylight, especially in terrain like this. In a residential area with limited lighting, a wash becomes a place of near total concealment. What would be visible during the day, shapes, motion, shadows, almost disappears in the dark. And a wash running behind a house, away from streetlights, becomes one of the darkest, least visible paths possible. Now consider what we have: the February 1st timeline, the geography of that wash, and a growing pattern of clothing discoveries in the exact same location. Together, these are not isolated details. They form the most urgent line of inquiry in this case as of March 30th, 2026. The physical evidence is in the wash. The sheriff has been notified. And what happens next is no longer in the hands of the community. It rests with an institution whose handling of this investigation has already been questioned by credible voices. But the role of the community cannot be overlooked. In fact, this case has shown just how powerful citizen investigators and independent researchers can be when official channels fail to produce timely answers. Because this hasn't been passive observation. The community has actively uncovered, tracked, and analyzed information in real time, sometimes even surfacing leads before law enforcement publicly addressed them. And that, in itself, has become part of the story. This case hasn't just been followed by the public, it has been actively worked by them. Long before any official forensic details were released, the community was already analyzing blood evidence. The pattern of those donut-shaped drops, what they suggest about velocity, surface impact, and origin. These were being discussed in depth by independent analysts while law enforcement remained silent. Then came the University of Arizona athletics label, spotted not by officials, but by an online investigator who analyzed publicly available footage, identified the detail with confidence, and moved to submit it to authorities. That lead didn't come from inside the investigation. It came from outside it. There was also the behavioral detail, the flashlight in mouth observation. A small moment, but one that this community broke down into something meaningful, linking it to a specific type of worker and familiarity with certain environments. And then there's the wash. Searched not by a coordinated task force, but by one individual, Jim, walking it repeatedly, understanding that terrain shifts, that one pass is never enough, and that evidence can appear where nothing was visible before. None of these leads started with official statements. Not one. Every single thread began with people paying attention, watching, questioning, analyzing, and applying real investigative reasoning to what was available. And every time, it forced a response. Because in this case, the community hasn't just followed the investigation. They've been driving parts of it. This is not something minor. It's a level of citizen journalism that demands recognition. And it raises a difficult question. Why is the community uncovering details that a fully resourced official investigation has not brought forward publicly? Exploring with Jim represents that effort directly. While the sheriff's department has faced press scrutiny and internal challenges, Jim has been out in the terrain, returning to the wash because the data suggested it mattered. And once again, that decision led to another discovery. The question now isn't whether he found something. It's whether law enforcement will treat those findings with the seriousness they deserve. The community's stance has been clear from the beginning. Keep watching, keep searching, keep reporting, regardless of what official channels choose to do. At the same time, there's another layer to this case: Nancy Guthrie's family, and specifically Savannah Guthrie. From early on, she became the public voice of the search. As a national television journalist, she brought a level of visibility that cases like this rarely receive. But her role hasn't been, or purely emotional. Her public statements have been measured, strategic, aligned with law enforcement as part of a broader investigative approach. That alone suggests something deeper, that what she has shared publicly may only be part of what she knows. Her appearance on national television marked a shift. The way the case was understood began to change, not through new evidence, but through how the story was being told. And that shift mattered. One detail changed how people understood this case, and it wasn't vague, it was specific. Savannah Guthrie said investigators had stood over her bed. That's not an abstract statement. It points to something physical, something examined closely within a defined space. Investigators don't do that without reason. It suggests a focused area inside the home, something important enough to draw that level of attention. She also mentioned responding to ransom notes. Not dismissing them, responding. Which means, at least at some point, law enforcement considered them credible enough to engage with. That decision likely shaped the early direction of the investigation in ways the public never fully saw. What she described was a family living inside uncertainty. No clear timeline. No confirmed suspect. No definitive answers. And at the same time, possibly holding back information, navigating a public narrative while dealing with a private reality that may be far more complex than what has been shared. And now, that reality intersects with geography. Because the wash producing these discoveries runs directly behind Annie Guthrie's house, the same Annie who made the call reporting Nancy missing. The same property now connected to a location where multiple items of clothing have been found. To be clear, Annie Guthrie has not been named a suspect by law enforcement. But the proximity, the connection between the home the wash, and the emerging pattern is no longer something that can be ignored. No one has been publicly named as a suspect in this case, and that matters. There are no conclusions here beyond what the evidence supports. But there are facts we cannot ignore. The wash is behind Annie Guthrie's house. The clothing was found in that wash. Those are fixed points. And in a case defined by one central mystery, how Nancy could have left without being seen, those facts carry weight. Because the geography offers something no camera captured. A route. A possibility. A gap in the record that now has physical evidence tied to it. Savannah Guthrie is set to return to the Today Show on April 6th. What she says then, after these latest developments, will matter. It will be watched closely, not just by the public, but by a community that has been tracking every detail of this case in real time. And that brings us to something deeper. Savannah is not just a family member, she's a journalist. She understands narrative, timing, and the power of information. What she has shared publicly has been deliberate. What she hasn't shared may be just as important. Because in cases like this, what is said, and what is withheld, can form a pattern of its own. The wash sits behind Annie's house. Annie is part of Savannah's family. And somewhere between what has been publicly stated and what has physically surfaced in that drainage channel lies the truth of what happened on February 1st, 2026. We don't have that truth yet, but step by step, piece by piece, we are getting closer to where it exists. And now, the part that changes everything. From the very beginning, this case has been framed around one question. Where is Nancy? But that was never the hardest question. Not even close. The real question, the one that has stalled every theory, challenged every investigator, and left this case unresolved for 59 days, is this. How do you prove what happened when you have no body, no confirmed crime scene, and no clear path of movement? That's the reality of a no-body case. And experts have been clear. Cases like this are solved through physical evidence. Not confessions. Not eyewitnesses. But tangible proof. Something that places a person, connects a location, and holds up under forensic scrutiny. And that's where this changes. Because what gets overlooked in large-scale searches is often not the obvious. It's the small things. A piece of clothing. A fiber. Something missed the first time, found only because someone went back and looked again. So if law enforcement has collected these items from the wash behind Annie Guthrie's house, and we do not yet know if they have, and if those items are tested, and if those tests connect them to Nancy, to that night, or to anyone involved, then that wash becomes something else entirely. Not just a location, but the place where this case finally begins to answer itself. That wash doesn't remain just a location, it becomes a scene. A defined, documentable, evidence-based scene in a case that, until now, hasn't had one. It becomes proof of movement, of a possible route, of concealment. It anchors this case to a specific place, behind a specific property, in a way that demands a full and serious investigation. After 59 days, after internal doubt within the department, after public statements that the original scene may have been permanently compromised, after every lead seemed to stall, what changed the direction again was simple. Someone went back. A YouTuber. A camera. The same wash. And more clothing, found in the same place. The sheriff has been notified. Now, everything depends on what happens next. So here's what matters moving forward. Not theories, not conclusions, but a framework. The wash is the location. The repeated discoveries form a pattern. The notification to law enforcement is a documented fact. And the response from the sheriff's department, that is the test. Not just of this case, but of the institution itself. Because if this evidence is properly collected, analyzed, and transparently shared with the public, that's accountability. And right now, that's what everyone is waiting to see. If those items are left untouched, unprocessed, unreported, unacknowledged, then that silence becomes an answer of its own. And in this case, that answer would carry as much weight as any piece of evidence. Because after 59 days, we understand something clearly. Hope is not the same as patience. This community isn't passive. It isn't waiting quietly. It's watching closely. Every press conference, every update, every lead, every stretch of that wash. The sheriff has been notified, and now the focus shifts to what happens next. At the center of all of this is one unchanging fact. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. And everything this community has built over the past 59 days, the analysis, the searches, the persistence, is driven by that reality. It's what pushes people like Jim to step into that dry riverbed again and again, when it would be easier to walk away. Because the truth is, many of the most important developments in this case haven't come from official channels. Not from press releases. Not from briefings. But from people, watching footage frame by frame, submitting tips, traveling to Tucson, walking the terrain themselves. From people online, calling attention to details, tagging journalists, insisting that something matters and needs to be seen. That's the pattern. And Jim's discovery on March 28th, documented, reported, and made public, is part of that same pattern. A pattern that, so far, has refused to be ignored. What we're seeing here is citizen investigation at the level this case demands, and it deserves to be taken seriously by the institution that has been notified. If you believe that independent investigators and this community deserve recognition for the work they've done, not just here, but in case after case where official channels have fallen short, then engagement matters. Because visibility determines whether this information reaches the people who need to see it. Follow along if you haven't already. This case is covered as it unfolds, not when it's convenient, not when it fits a cycle, but when it matters. And right now, it matters. Look at the evidence. Study the images. Ask the questions. What does this pattern in the wash mean? What should law enforcement do next? And what do you think they actually will do? Because this community doesn't just observe. It finds. It analyzes. And it holds institutions accountable when they fail to act. And that has proven to matter, again and again. We will keep watching. We will keep reporting. And Nancy Guthrie will not be forgotten. If you have information related to the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, please contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department tip line or the Tucson FBI field office directly.